A house with a history of murder, an unsuspecting family, supernatural phenomena with evil intent. All this can only mean one thing. We're comparing Amityville Horror on this episode of Retro versus Remake.
I'm Reggie Parker.
And I'm Dan Bulick. Welcome to another episode of
Retro versus Remake.
The podcast where we compare films and their remakes. Join us as we explore the question, should this remake exist? Today's episode, Amityville Horror. So the original Amityville Horror, made in 1979, starring James Brolin, Margot Kidder, Rod Steiger, Don Stroud, and Natasha Ryan. Directed by Stuart Rosenberg. One movie I'm familiar he directed is Cool Hand Luke. Screenplay by Sandor Stern. Music by Lalo Schifrin. He's known for also Cool Hand Luke. He also did the Mission Impossible theme. Yes, that Mission Impossible theme. One of my favorite movies, Enter the Dragon. And he did a rejected score for The Exorcist. So he has a little bit of history with horror. It was never used. Yeah, there was actually a rumor that his original score got rejected, was used for this movie, but it's a totally different score. Anyways, the remake, Amityville Horror 2005, starring Ryan Reynolds, Melissa George, Jesse James, Jimmy Bennett.
Oh, introducing. I love that part of again. Introducing Chloe Grace Moretz.
Directed by Andrew Douglas. I am not familiar with his work. He actually didn't have a Wikipedia page, and he has an IMDb page, but he doesn't have anything that I'm familiar with. I think he did a couple episodes of that Mindhunter series on Netflix. Anyways, screenplay by Scott Kosar, music by Steve Jablonsky. He's known for the Transformers films and a little bit of Metal Gear Solid 2 for all my gamer friends out there. And I'm just going to make a special note here that one of the producers of this film was good old Michael Bay. So yeah, maybe you know what to expect there. All right, Reggie, what is your first experience with either film?
First experience with either film is this podcast.
Same. Never watched either film.
Yeah, I'm not a big horror movie guy. Like, I've watched some horror films, and there are ones that I like, but I generally don't indulge in the genre, as it were. So this was my first experience with both films.
I had, I guess, heard about the remake when it came out, but I wasn't that interested in it, and definitely never saw or heard anything about the original. I didn't know who was in it, or I didn't even know the story. I knew it was about like a murder, and to my surprise, like I thought that he killed his family, but like as we see in both movies, the whole family gets away and with their lives. So I was like, oh, they actually all lived. I did not expect that. I thought everybody was going to die. So I knew nothing going into this.
You would expect that from at least from the remake, but everybody spoiler to the end, I guess, but everybody more or less okay.
Yeah, except for maybe a dog. But we'll get to that, I'm sure. Let's get into a comparison, but before that, let's do a brief synopsis. In 1974, 6 members of a family, 2 parents and 4 siblings, were murdered in their home by Ronald Defoe, the eldest son. 1 year later, George and Kathy Lutz move into the very same home with their 3 children and dog, even after being told about the murders. Everything seems fine at first, but strange phenomena occur. The daughter sees an imaginary friend, Jody. The babysitter gets locked in a closet. George Lutz is always cold and seems to be coming down with a sickness. Strange voices can be heard. People see things that may or may not be there. Blood comes out of the plumbing and even the walls. A priest even tries to bless the house, but bizarre swarm of flies prevent him from doing so. They even discover a hidden room in the basement where even more murders may have occurred much further in the past. George seems to have a slip in sanity and becomes more and more hostile. After only 28 days in the house, things come to a head and George almost murders everyone. However, he is able to regain his sanity, and the family leaves all their possessions behind, and they never return to the house again. A little bit of a short synopsis, because there's definitely some things that the movies do differently, but it's pretty much like a haunted house, and then in the end, everybody's okay. Kind of a deal.
That is the case for both films, where there's a lot of tension and trauma that's happening, but ultimately they just sort of leave.
Yeah, it sort of fizzles out. There's no sort of payoff, I guess, for all the
Yeah.
tension that you've had to experience, especially in the first one because it's so much longer.
Yeah, I think we'll get in the run times and the payoffs down the line, but there's a few other things that we should probably talk about before we get to the big or not big ending, as it were. I think I'm looking at your notes, and it looks like you're bringing up some of the differences between the original film and the religious aspects versus less focus on religion in the remake.
Yeah. The original definitely puts more focus on I guess, the Christianity, and like they talk about the devil, and there's a crucifix, and there's more like of a priest storyline in the original. I thought the remake was going to stray away from that, and they kind of did, but then they eventually do bring a priest in. But it's definitely more heavy with the religion, and like I think the original is more influenced by The Exorcist than the remake, and I think you could definitely feel that. Did you get that kind of sense from watching it?
Yeah, I definitely caught a bit of an Exorcist vibe, and I had to do some research sort of after the fact, and it makes sense. The Exorcist came out 6 years before this movie did. Exorcist was 1973, and this original film being 1979. I mean, clear influence there, where they do almost everything but mention an exorcism. Like there's a scene where it's obvious like the father wants to embark on something like an exorcism and he kind of gets shooed off. But there's a lot of religious imagery and just religious moments throughout the film before your big climax.
There's the crucifix. I remember even there's mention of like Adam and Eve at one point. And they almost do follow the Exorcist formula. They have the old priest that kind of knows what he's doing, and then they have the young mentor priest kind of just like trying to help him and just trying to understand everything. And they kind of go the same route. Like instead of killing like the Father Merrin character like in The Exorcist, they blind the priest in Amityville Horror. So yeah, they almost do follow like that same sort of priest journey in both films.
Yeah. I think early on in the film, really before you start seeing the effects on the family, you're seeing the effects on the priest a lot earlier than when things really go off the rails for the family. And I mean, this guy goes through the ringer, man. Like the fly scene, I know we're going to talk about a little bit, but like he's basically getting tormented. His hands are getting burned. Can't breathe at certain times.
Throwing up everywhere.
Yeah, it's just like, you know what, dude, maybe new line of profession.
Yes, poor guy. He's like, I need to help that family. And then he starts choking or his hand starts blistering. It's like,
Yeah.
Is it worth it? You just move on.
You know, at some point, I'm like just not going to pick up the phone. You know, it's like there's nothing good coming from it.
It's a bit redundant in the original film because not only is it a priest that does that, but a nun who's the aunt of Kathy kind of goes through the same thing when she visits. So it's like, if you didn't think this house was unholy, check it out as a nun also gets sick. It's like,
Right.
Did we need both of them?
Yeah, I don't know if you need both of them because the aunt is only really in two scenes. The scene where she shows up, she pinches the kids on the cheeks, and then she's like, "Oh man, you know what? I don't feel that good, and I'm gonna leave."
And puke.
Margot Kidder's like, "No, please stay," and she's like, "Fuck that, I'm out." And then you see her again at the wedding. She's like, "Yeah, I don't know what happened. I got really sick," and it's like, "Yeah, we saw that. You didn't have to explain that at the wedding."
It's funny. She's
But,
like, I was sick and I'm okay now. Okay, great. So that was worth it to watch that.
There was also an element later on, and you know we'll talk about some of the different characters, but it seems that George actually is not of the same religion as the Margot Kidder character, like Kathy Lutz. His coworker, which we'll talk about a little bit, but he mentions that you're hanging out with this new woman, you change your religion and all that stuff. So I don't know if that's supposed to be part of this, that maybe that's why he's being affected. Obviously, there's a lot of ties to Catholicism. The priest sense the evil before truly the family does, and it takes a while for the family to pick up on that there may be satanic forces at work here.
I'm not sure if him changing religions, because it's mentioned very briefly by his friend.
Very brief.
It's just that, yeah, you change religions. And it's like, well, is that an important thing? Do I need to know that? But it's kind of like a lot of things in this movie. It's sort of just, it's just mentioned, but it's never really resolved in the end. I'm not sure what his changing religion, if that's the reason that he was affected the most out of everybody in that family.
Could be a factor, probably not a factor. It seems to be more that he kind of like looks like the previous resident, and apparently he's just more affected by the house.
religion is pretty heavy-handed in the original, and then it's like I said, it's sort of brought up in the remake. I think the main reason they brought the priest in the remake was just to sort of recreate that famous flies scene, to kind of put their own take on it, which is a pretty intense scene in the original. I must say, like, just that would freak me out. Like, all of a sudden these flies just kind of appear out of nowhere, and then they're just like on your face and just like all over you, making you choke. Man, it's unsettling, it's very unsettling.
Absolutely unsettling, and it's so early in the film that you're just sitting there and like very quickly, you know, something's up. I find that there's a little bit more mystery in that first film, but you know, you just see all these flies and then they're inside somehow and they're on the priest's face, and you see the door open and the voice is saying "get out." It's a pretty crazy scene, and I can understand why the remake would want to play that back, just because it is such a big scene in the original film.
Yeah, and it's definitely a powerful scene. Like you said, it's early in the film, so it definitely sets the tone. Like, there's something wrong here, and you're gonna experience it firsthand. Like you said, there's a little bit, maybe you hear a voice, but I guess the supernatural element isn't too heavy-handed at that point, where you're like, oh, it's definitely a ghost. You're just like, what is it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Something's wrong. I don't exactly know. But yeah, that image will stick in your brain for the rest of the film, just like all those flies and everything. It's pretty intense.
Yeah, and even the way they do in the original, with some of the like close-ups on flies and stuff like that, where like you're just seeing all this. It's well shot, you know, like you're getting the wide shot of the guy just choking on flies. You're getting these gross out close-ups of the flies themselves, and like, hey, big up to that actor. He's just like, he does a great job of looking like he's struggling to breathe because he's just being like pelted with flies.
Yeah. And then you have that scene sort of redone in the remake, done much later.
Very much later.
And we definitely have CGI flies. These are definitely not real flies. It's a 2005 film, too. So watching it in 2019, not as good. Not as effective, I would definitely say. Because instead of just having the flies sort of occasionally subtly appear, it's just like this swarm that just comes out of this vent and knocks him over. And in order to do that, you have to use these computer animated flies. And you can definitely tell they're fake. And we'll talk about this a lot later, but it's a jump scare. The remake relies heavily on jump scares.
Absolutely. I think you bring up the point that you make, that it happens so much later in the movie. The way the two movies are essentially framed. And like you mentioned, we will bring this up more of the jump scares. That word redundant kind of comes back to mind here, because the religion is just kind of like sort of shoehorned in there. Like the kids are saying their prayers early in the movie, so you know that there's Kathy's religious in both films. But it doesn't come up a lot. You don't see like the crucifix in the remake necessarily. By the time the priests come there, you already know something's up. And we're going to get into this aspect of it too. But like, you really know something's up in the remake very early on. So by the time the priest shows up, there's not much more to sort of draw from in terms of things being off. Where in the original film, the priest is effectively letting you know how off things are right there. So the character comes much earlier and has a much bigger effect. Whereas in the remake, the character comes late and it's just kind of more of the same at that point.
Yeah, that's true, because we already know that there's issues with that house. Him leaving the house doesn't go, oh man, there really is a danger there. And we don't even really spend time. I think he's only in 2 scenes. I think he's just that one scene when he comes to bless the house, and then later the Kathy character just visits him. Again, we don't really learn anything new. It doesn't really escalate anything. It's just, like you said, more of the same.
Yeah. The one upside on the priest on the back end is that, you know, there seems to be an item from the house that was owned by the little girl previously. And he has this sort of ominous line where it's like, she was buried with that doll. And it's like, okay, you know, that's strange. But again, at this point, the way the movies are shot, it doesn't really matter that there's more phenomenon happening, because we kind of already know the deal.
We not only do we know like what's happening, we kind of already know like who it is, right? I mean, I guess we can get into this now.
I'll say this before we like really dive into it. What I appreciate about the first one with the priest is being affected by all this stuff. He gets really sick. He starts getting burns on his hands and stuff like that. There's a lot of questions about his health at that point. Like you said, his little mentee, as it were, is clearly noticing something's wrong. What makes the priest in the religious aspect more powerful in the first film is in Father Delaney has to go to the church. Like he goes to like sort of the higher ups and he says, "Hey, look, I've seen this before. This is like really some like occult Satanist stuff." And he's basically fighting for the family's life. So you have this outside actor that's saying, "Hey, there's something wrong with this house, and we need to do something as a church." And the church kind of pushes back and says that everything can be explained away, which to me is powerful because in the first film, things can be explained away. You know, like yes, we're noticing strange things happening in the house, but like we really don't know yet exactly what's happening. And I think that ties into what I think you were about to sort of get at with the difference between the two movies.
Yeah, that's true. Just adding to that a little bit. So I do like some of the religious things in the original film, but I definitely just watching it, I couldn't help but go like, I feel like they're just going a little heavy with the religion just because Exorcist did it. We definitely spend a lot of time with the priests, a little more than I feel like we need to necessarily. So like while I liked some of it, I definitely like the flies scene. I don't think like we needed to see like everything that happened with the priest, or I think the story was just a little too long, which I think we'll talk about, and just how the original is just a little long. But I definitely appreciated some of that stuff, and I was kind of hoping that the remake would stray away from it, which it did for the most part.
It makes you ask questions about the mechanics of like the house. Like in the original film, because like you said, we spent so much time with the priest and things like that, it's like, what is the sort of like range on the house's like ability, you know? Because he's basically like in a church, like trying to like bless the family, and things are happening to him. Like you mentioned, when he goes blind, or when they're on their way back to the house and the car, the brakes aren't working, and the hood flies up. It's like, how much power does this house have? And also like what is its effective range? Like these guys are not anywhere near there, and they're just getting like, I don't know, they're getting sort of like jerked around by the occult. It's a little strange.
Yeah. It's like, what is the triggering mechanism? It's like, it's because you were already at the house, so now there's this ominous presence around you all times, just keeping you in check. Like, hey, if you even talk about the house, bad stuff's gonna happen to you. It gets a little iffy there. You're just like, well, they're getting attacked now again. It's like, why? It's a little confusing.
As you mentioned, like there's so much time with the priest that's like, you kind of like, you start feeling bad for the guy because you're like, he hasn't really done much in this house. It's like taking a lot of its ire out on him. It's like, geez, man, like cut the guy a little bit of slack, you know?
Yeah, he wasn't even able to bless the house at all. At least in the remake, the father was at least able to put a little holy water on there. He got attacked by a swarm of flies, but that was it. Him and the house were done after that. Like, he didn't get blisters on his, hands. He didn't go blind. He didn't start seeing weird things. Yeah. That poor priest in the first one, he just got I think he got it worse than George did, honestly.
He got it the worst, in my opinion. He more or less just gets beat up spiritually, and it's like, it's a little, I guess, off-putting, I guess, if you're going to go for such a religious aspect. It seems that religion doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
Like
nothing.
The most holy guy there is getting the biggest punishment. And, really his biggest sin, as it were, was that he was a true believer in the church. And all it got him was blisters, blinded, choked by flies. It's kind of off-putting. It starts making you ask certain questions that I don't think the movie needs you to ask. It's probably just a little bit too much time focusing on religion when, like, ultimately religion doesn't solve it.
Yeah, like, it's almost like they're saying, like, religion has no power. Like, this is so evil. Like, even religion's, like, powerless against it. Like, I think that's one of those statements that I shouldn't be saying from watching the movie, but that's kind of what I'm getting. Like, wow, even religion has no power here. This is just, sorry, religion, not today.
Whereas, like, it works for a movie like The Exorcist because the religion is on kind of, like, equal footing. Like, there's occult things happening. There's, like, the unexplained and evil happening. But at least you're able to battle it a little bit. Yeah,
there's a little bit of pushback. Religion is able to do something, at least. But, like, in Amityville Horror, like, you can't even get your foot in the door. You're just going to get attacked.
You can't pick up the phone to even talk about coming by to maybe do something. It's like the power of the house. And I do certainly want to get into that a little bit later in the podcast. But, like, the power of the house in the original is, in both films, but in the original especially, is intriguing because at times I'm not really sure how it works. in both films, but like more so in the original to me. I'm like, where does this end? Like, where's the range on this? It just seems a little ambiguous, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. We'll get into that, I'm sure.
Yeah,
But we
yeah,
can change direction a little bit and talk about, I guess, the tone of the films. You had some pretty good notes about that.
yeah. It ties kind of back into religion aspects a little bit. I know that we're going to talk about it, but tonally in the original film, to me, the word that kind of jumps out to me is mystery. I'm not really sure what's happening. Yes, there's the flies and there's the little girls seeing things, and there's little moments that are very subtle, like when the girl's sitting in a rocking chair and then there's the other rocking chair going until like the mom walks into the room. Like that's a really cool and powerful scene in the film. Someone died there. Like that's given in both films early on. And now the question is, how does that affect these new inhabitants of the house? And there's a lot more question marks that I have about it in the original film. Whereas in the remake, and I think you may agree with me on this. The mystery's gone. Like the cat's out of the bag very early on
Yeah.
because they're using that more modern jump scare style horror.
Yeah. I guess going along with what you're saying, in the original, we don't see really any of the apparitions. Maybe towards the end, I think George might see like kind of a horned demon through the house window towards the very end. And I think that's maybe like the only real time that you see like, okay, there's something there. But like early on in the movie, you really don't see anything like you said. You're getting these subtle things like rocking chairs and flies, but there's nothing like spelled out for you, right? You're kind of making your own assumptions at this point. But in the remake, they're just like, here's a ghost,
Right.
like almost immediately, pretty
Like
early on.
basically day one, ghost. Here it is. There's a little ghost girl, and it's like, okay,
So like I was saying, I think the original took a lot of influence from The Exorcist. I think the remake took a lot of influence from The Ring. You take the little dead, scary, creepy girl with the long black hair, and they use that a lot in the remake.
yeah. And I mean, I guess to talk about tone a little bit, and I know we'll get into some of the other jump scare moments and some of the more out there parts of the remake. I mean, the ghost girl, yes, it's creepy. The whole like when the babysitter shows up and like basically puts her finger in like the bullet hole, it's just like
Pretty
it's
gross.
just little, yeah, it's gross and it's a little off. I mean, what I think makes the original where it does work, what really makes it function, is that the question is Jodie a figment of her imagination
Hmm.
or is it real? That question is out there very late in the movie, where it's like, is this girl just being like a creep? Is she being affected by the house, or is there more to it? Where in the remake, it's like there's this Jodie girl, and then you see the actual physical sort of embodiment of Jodie as a ghost. And early on, it's like, okay, well, we now know that this house is truly haunted. There's no question mark anymore. Like we know what's happening, and I think it happens a little too early in the film, and it sort of takes away from the progression for the George character. It's sort of the progression for the family because you know what the problem is very soon, and at least in the original film, because they don't know what the problem is, it makes sense that they're there as long as they are.
Yeah,
A
that's a good point.
a little more so, because it's like, all right, you guys are giving it a good try. You don't really know what's affecting you. As I mentioned with the priest, like some of the stuff can be explained away. Not so in the next film. Like everybody's seeing. I mean, everybody is seeing stuff, and it almost is like maybe you guys should have like a conversation about what you're seeing because
Yeah.
you might solve this thing.
I like the subtlety more of the original because it's almost like you can relate to it. Like, hey, you move into this new big house. Maybe sometimes you hear something, or maybe you see something and it's not really there, and you're not sure. And you can kind of like play these mind games with yourself. Like, is something really there? And then, I don't know. But then, like in the remake, they're just like, no, it's definitely a ghost, and you can't
Right.
you can't relate to that. It's like you're not gonna see a ghost in your house like when you move in right away. So I think it's just also more relatable in a bizarre way. I think they definitely do it too early in the remake, and they do it very often in the remake.
Mm-hmm.
And it's done not sort of consistent because it's sometimes the people do see it, and sometimes the people
Right.
don't see it. So
Right.
it's like it's only supposed to scare the audience watching it the entire time. It's not consistent the effect that it has on the people who are watching in the film. So I thought that was
Right.
a weird choice too, that they don't always see the ghosts.
I think that's a weird choice. Like yeah, you mentioned the scene. I mean, like you mentioned that, like the scene where the ghost is above
Yeah.
George, but like is kind of like there's other hands and like closing his mouth so he never sees it. I thought it was very interesting that the babysitter had seen it so like with such prevalence. Like I thought it was an odd moment for the babysitter to be so affected by that. But I mean, you see a lot of these jump scares, and I think a problem with the film where it suffers with these jump scares is jump scares into like basically like dream sequences where like someone gets up and like, oh geez, what was that?
Yeah.
Jumping back into a jump scare and then another wake up scene. It's like sometimes you don't know if you're watching, as you mentioned, a real thing that's happening, if they're seeing it, or is this a dream? Is it a dream within a dream? Like it gets a little confusing, and I guess it's maybe to try to show you that psychologically they're breaking down, but it actually just sort of confuses you because a lot of the big scary moments aren't real.
Yeah.
So you're kind of training the audience to be like, well, just wait a couple of seconds to see if this is a real one or this is a fake one,
Yeah.
which I think actually hurts the movie.
Definitely. It loses its effectiveness. And then, like you said, you're just going to wait. Because, wait, that didn't really happen, did it? Okay, it didn't. Because you've done it so many times before. It relies very heavily on these sort of fake dream sequences that they don't scare you at all because you just trained yourself to wait just a few seconds to see that, oh, it is a dream. It's like they set it up so bizarre that way. I don't know. I guess they relied too heavily on it. They're like, oh, it worked once, let's do it again. But
Yeah.
you can't keep doing the fake out like that. And especially towards the end, it really pissed me off. Spoilers, when Kathy gets stabbed in the stomach with the axe. I was like, oh shit, they went there with this. But no, it wasn't even a dream sequence. It was just like a vision George saw that he's like, now you have to kill me.
And it's, there's visions in the first film, but like
they don't rely on it as much.
Yeah, not nearly as much. And I mean, like the sequence that I'm thinking of, I don't know the exact sort of framework of it, but like George wakes up, something crazy happens. He wakes up again, something crazy happens, and it's just like, wait a minute. Like, where is he asleep? Is he not asleep? Like you mentioned the Cappy thing, I thought that would have been powerful if that had truly like happened, or if like in that moment because Kathy like sort of doesn't go through with shooting him, maybe if the son did something with the axe and like even if you don't kill George in that moment, if like the teenage son, which I think we will talk about the age of the kids as well, with him being older, there's a moment there for you to have him kind of fight back and maybe like it's not effective enough to kill George, but we can create some drama there that's just not there because things that are happening aren't happening. To be, I guess, fair to the film, when you think about horror movies like this, the theater experience is probably what they're going for more than just you and I watching this in our own house. There's a difference to watching a scary movie in a theater, big screen, big sound. It didn't play well, I guess, watching it at home because I just couldn't be bothered. I was like, all right, well, we'll see what happens.
Because jump scares definitely get old when you're watching a movie by yourself. So definitely not as effective as the original. I like the subtlety of the original, the mystery, like you said. I think that plays better. And yeah, I just think they were relying too heavily on let's show that creepy girl again. That worked in The Ring, right? So let's show it here. I think they relied too much on that.
To sort of be fair when you're talking about the tone of the original, I think that tonally there's some issues with the original as well. I think that in general it seems to work better, but because the main villain, as it were, is a house, there's some problems with that logic as well. One thing that kind of pokes out to me is like right before Kathy's brother's like wedding, the house steals like $1,500 from him, and I'm just like, all right, wait a minute. So the house is like stealing money.
It's a pickpocket house.
Like, I appreciated a lot of the subtlety, the horror, not knowing like where some of the drama is going to come from, but some of it just also rang as like petty in a weird way. It's like, oh, the house like dropped your like something fell, and then the guy lost $1,500. It's like, well, that's not scary. It's not scary that he like lost his money. And I think this comes down to runtime. Honestly, there's a couple of like the moments that are supposed to be like, what the fuck's happening, that are also just like kind of boring. And I will say that that's probably the biggest weakness tonally for the first film.
I mean, it definitely drags on. at points. Like I said, I think they spend a little bit too much time on the priests in the first film, because ultimately what happens, the old priest just becomes blind. He never comes in and saves the day. There's not really a resolution to the religion versus the evil house. It just kind of fizzles out. And to go along with the priest, there's also that investigator who's kind of following the family around, and we follow him for a bit, and his story also kind of goes nowhere. So there's a few storylines in the original that are unresolved and ultimately unnecessary, especially since we're talking about a 2-hour film, that it is hard to keep your attention, and there's definitely some cuts that could have been made.
Yeah. Like, the sergeant doesn't pay off at all. One scene that really jumps out to me is the amount of time we spend when, like, the doors of the house kind of just blow off for, like, randomly. And then the investigator comes and says, well, it doesn't look like a break-in, and, you know, the doors are being busted out and not in, which is, like, typically not part of a break-in. And it's like, at this point, we already kind of know things are off. You know, we've already had a lot of paranormal activity. The doors blowing out didn't move the needle much in any direction. If you were trying to show that, like, the sergeant is skeptical of George, at least bring him back in, you know, at some point. Maybe he's around when George is kind of having his freak out at the end to do something. But, like, for him to just be like, that's weird, and then, like, never show up again in any, like, significant way, it's a waste. And it actually, I mean, that's another 10 minutes of screen time that you could have just cut out because it didn't do anything.
Yeah, I thought they would kind of kill him. Because I thought, like, oh, he's going to come back at the end, try to save the family, and the house is going to kill him, right? That's going to escalate things. That made sense to me. Didn't happen. He doesn't even show up at all.
No, that's it, you know? He's early on in the movie when the original family stuff is happening. He comes back later. I mean, he could have at least sort of revealed some information there. Like, when he came to the house, he was like, you're acting just like that other guy. I'm going to keep an eye on you. You know, that would have been more than just like, well, that's not how a door breaks. You know, it doesn't look like a break-in. It's like, well, we know it's not a break-in. I know that. You know that. So for him to say that it's not a break-in doesn't do anything if the cop never shows back up. So I think you're right. Yeah. Like, if he would have been more skeptical of George, as you mentioned, maybe been kind of trailing him or, like, coming around the house to, like, check in and notice George kind of losing it, I think you're right that would have been worth it. But it wasn't worth it because he never shows up.
Yeah, and I think it would have given him, like, an interesting kind of arc, because he was there for the original murders, and then he maybe becomes kind of obsessed with the people living in this house, and then maybe give him something to do. Like, I think having him killed, like, having it be his ultimate demise, because he got obsessed with the house after the first murders, you know, give him somewhere to go, instead of just kind of tailing the priest and talking about more stuff that we didn't really need, that we really didn't need to know about.
From a film perspective, I'll give the remake that's just a good cut. Like, didn't need it. Glad it's not there because it doesn't do anything. There's some other issues, like we mentioned, tonally with the film, but they do a good job of sort of cutting out unnecessary things, whereas the original keeps in a lot of stuff that we don't need. Doesn't really pay off. I don't know if we want to jump into some of the character stuff more, because I think that will bring us back into some stuff that we don't need, because there's a lot in the original with George that I think it builds out his character, but did we need it? You know? Yeah.
I actually just want to build off a little bit on, like, how the remake made some good cuts, but, like, I think I agree with you. There was definitely some smart cuts in the remake, but I think this kind of goes back to the jump scare stuff and showing the ghost. I think they kind of made a mistake by showing us too much sometimes. Like, even, like, the opening of both movies, you actually see the original murders, the Defoe family, I believe. Right. And I actually really like how the original did that. You don't really follow Ronald. Okay.
I'm sorry, kind of like you don't know what he looks like, or like
we don't know. We don't really know who did the murders in the original at first. You find out later that it was the son. You don't really see him watching TV, kind of hearing voices. You don't see him like interacting with the young sister. That's kind of like the jump scare like of the original movie. Just these all of a sudden, just bang, these huge shotgun shots, and then just everybody's dead. And then in the remake, you kind of follow him around a little bit more, and he actually talks to the sister a little bit, which is pretty creepy. But I thought it was more effective in the original, just showing us less of that original murder, because not only do they show you more in the remake, then later the babysitter tells you about it again, right? And we're talking redundant again, so that's more we didn't really need. So you either show us less in the beginning or don't have the babysitter say it again, because we already knew that information and now you're just saying it again. As much as the remake is making smart cuts, it also definitely has some redundancies or unnecessary additions.
Sure. I think that sort of goes back to what makes a lot of the remake work, which is the mystery. You're figuring things out the same way the characters are figuring things out. Like, by not knowing sort of what happened in that murder. Was it the father? Was it the brother? Like, you don't know that until much later. And it makes you wonder more about the house and the murders, because you're like, what kind of spurring this, paranormal activity, more or less. And yes, it runs for probably longer than it needs to, but at least you don't know what's going on until later. So there's some interest in like following the story, as it were. In the remake, you're right. Like early on, about everything you need to know. In the house, I think even the realtor tells them like about the murders. So knowing kind of what happened makes you less sympathetic to them still sort of being there, because you already know that there's a problem. You've seen the ghost. You've seen all this bad stuff happening. In the original, it's like, all right, like you notice things are happening, but like, how bad is it at this point? Is this something that we can sort of push through? Remake is like, this is clearly a problem. You kind of know what the guy that murdered someone looks like. You need the mystery to stay on the ride, in my opinion.
Yeah,
that's it.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point, because you don't know all the information, right? You're slowly getting bits and pieces in the original, right? And that's sort of justifying the longer running time, because you do want to know. You want to know what's happening and like why this is happening. And you're hoping that the movie's going to tell you eventually. But then like in the remake, they tell you right away, it's a ghost. And so you're like, okay, it is ghosts. So now you're just waiting kind of for shit to hit the fan. Like, all right, when's the murder going to happen? Because you don't have to keep telling me that there's ghosts here, because that's all they keep doing. Right. They're not telling you any more information about the murders. You're not learning anything new. You're just seeing more jump scares. And you're just like, all right, I get it. This kind of sucks. But like, when's the horror part going to happen? When's the husband going to go crazy? You're just waiting for that, like almost like 10 minutes into the movie, because the mystery's gone. But like in the original, it's like, okay, so little piece here, little piece there. I'm learning, and then it's going to build up to something, and I can't wait to see where that goes. There's a lot more build up in anticipation, because they reveal so little at a time, and that grabs my attention personally as a viewer.
I think that when you're watching the original, early on, your focus is more or less on the house, because you don't have anything else to reference. By modern standards, a little cheesy now, but like at the time, I'm sure it's fine. Like the red lights in the house, like I don't know if it's supposed to kind of like almost like anthropomorphize it, make it look like a face or something like that. Your beef is with the house, and it just opens it up to trying to figure out what's happening in the house. Whereas like in the remake, there's a little ghost girl that's like fucking with people. All right, well, like how are they gonna deal with this ghost girl? And like you said, it's so early on that's your now question. There's no question about what's happening in the house. You know what's happening. So then we now have to sort of do this whole progression, knowing what's going on, and ultimately having to see how they're trying to resolve it, where you give yourself a little more leeway with an audience when they don't know what's going on.
Yeah, sort of the unknown is more scary than the known. I think one amazing example of that in both movies is when the babysitter does get locked in the closet. The way it's done in the original, she's a lot younger, first of all, and she goes into this closet. There's like one single source of light, and then the closet door locks on her. She starts panicking a little bit. Then the light goes out. She's freaking out. She doesn't know what's happening. You don't know what's happening. It's just, I think it's a brilliant scene in the original movie, and that freaks me out. if you have any issues with being claustrophobic or anything, I think that scene will definitely like scare the shit out of you. And then the way they did it in the remake, you know, she's a lot older, so she's not this vulnerable little girl. She's not only do you see the ghost, which, you know, obviously we said isn't as scary. We already know there's a ghost. We get it. But like she can also see outside the closet, so she's not completely alone in the dark. And you see the things that's happening. You're not like freaking out like, oh my God, what's going to happen to her? You see exactly everything they want you to see. And I think not knowing what's going on with her in that closet, I think that's a lot more scary than just, okay, there's a ghost there, and it was creepy as shit and gross putting the finger in the bullet hole, but like I know what's happening, so I guess I'm more okay, as opposed to like I don't know what's happening to this girl in this closet. I'm so worried about her. Please show me what's happening to her.
Yeah, I think those scenes play out completely different. One, the babysitter's age is part of it. Two, the babysitter's experience with the previous family. Where in the original film, it's not implied that she babysat for murdered people, you know, that. And then it's a pivotal scene in the first film for the little girl character, because you're sitting there and it almost looks like she's just kind of like allowing this to happen. It makes you question her motives. So like now you're skeptical of the daughter of this little girl, because it looks like she's just kind of like letting this one chick suffer. And then kind of go back around and talk about what's happening there a little bit. But it frames sort of George's reaction in a better way. It frames sort of the family's interaction in a better way, because people are still skeptical of what's going on at that point. The babysitter freaks out, and then everyone's still like, well, look, the door doesn't have a lock, you know. Like they talk about that a little bit. And it's still kind of up in the air of who's responsible for that point. At that point, like the family is thinking, in a way, like this babysitter's kind of dumb. Like there's no lock here. Like I don't know what the problem is. In the remake, like when you get the bullet hole, she's older, she has experience with Jodie, so she knows what Jodie looks like. When it's all said and done, instead of just kind of being like, oh, I couldn't get out, she's like damn near like comatose.
Yeah, she's like catatonic, but she's like freaking out, man.
And it's like, I get why she's freaking out, but like, for instance, we were talking about the sheriff in the first, or the sergeant in the first film. All right, like he was there to like kind of oversee stuff like this. In this moment, you had someone like freak the fuck out. They got bloody knuckles. They get pulled away by the EMTs. No one has any questions, like authoritative point. It just leaves this open-ended moment, and I don't feel like the little girl's motivation is in question, because we already know she sees ghosts. Because not only does she see ghosts, the babysitter saw the ghosts. Other people saw the ghosts. You know, like it just has a different impact on George's reaction to the little girl not doing something, I guess, in that moment.
Yeah, he's more mad at the babysitter. He's like, fucking goddamn babysitter, telling the kids the story.
Now that I'm kind of thinking back to it in my head, even that, it's a bigger moment in the remake, in the sense that like everybody was trying to get her out of the thing. Like the sons were there too, so it's completely different, because we're still talking about tone. It's tonally completely different. Mm-hmm. Like I guess George is kind of blaming all of the kids collectively, but I think the first one just works so much better, like you mentioned, that you don't know what's going on at all. You're not expecting her to get locked in there at all. And when it's all said and done, there's still a question mark is this babysitter just freaking out for no reason? Or is it really the paranormal again?
Yeah, and I like what you said before. It's like, can you trust the daughter in the first movie? Like, what are her motives? Why didn't she do anything? Like, is she even still the daughter anymore? Or is there just Jodie at that point? You know, there's a lot of these questions that you're asking yourself, and it keeps you engaged. And then there's no question in the remake. You're like, oh, it was the ghost. Mm-hmm. Moving on. Let's go. I'm ready to go. Come on, let's go to that night. Let's go to the horror night already. But don't keep showing me more things. I get it. There's the ghost.
Yeah, ghost did it. Finger in the bullet hole. Freak out. Yeah. Like, I don't know. Maybe this is just more of a choice of like scenery and stuff like that. The door looks way flimsier in the remake, especially given that woman's age. I think that she could have found a reasonable way to get out of that door, whereas it looks more solid in the original. Not to make a big point about it, just like it took me out of it a bit, because like you can see the slats in the door, and it's just like you could probably get out of there. Yeah,
like I was saying, she could actually see out through the door, and I think that was pretty weak. You could probably punch through those things to get out instead of.
I think so.
Yeah. We're kind of comparing characters here, so maybe we should get into our main character comparisons. All right, so let's start with the main character, George Lutz. He was played by James Brolin, Thanos' daddy. And we got Ryan Reynolds, Deadpool, in the remake. Interesting, because I'm sorry, there's a Josh Brolin, right? He was Cable, and then he was in Deadpool 2 with Ryan Reynolds, so they worked together. There you go.
There's a connection there.
Little connection. Anyways, what do you think about the Georges?
I'm conflicted in this sense. The early George in the remake I like. The late George in the original I like more. What I mean by that is Ryan Reynolds has just more personality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's cracking jokes and he's being a fun guy. He's doing the Ryan Reynolds thing. Also, everyone wants you to know how ripped he is because he takes a ton, man. But I think that it actually hurts the film how personable Ryan Reynolds is early on, because by the end he's just such a fucking lunatic that it just doesn't feel right, Like you went from this like nice guy to essentially raving lunatic. The original film, George is just kind of more like, I'm a '70s guy. I'm a cool dude, Like I got my jacket, I got my lady,
got my hair. Oh, he's got a beautiful head of hair. That George
looks great. Like he's more of an open slate. Like he's a clear slate. There's not much to the character early on, and by the end you're learning more about him, and the transition in his sanity feels a little bit it feels like there's a better flow to that, in my opinion. I don't know how you feel about it.
I kind of agree with you. Okay, I guess I'll start with the original George. I think he doesn't really have much of a personality in the beginning, but one thing I do kind of like what they did in the original is they didn't show that he had a really close relationship with the kids. They did that more in the remake. The idea that he could possibly kill his family, the evolution of that seemed more natural in the original, just because he was a little more distant from those kids. And then you have the remake where Ryan Reynolds is being Ryan Reynolds with the kids in the beginning, right? Cracking jokes, trying to be as charming as he can. And then almost out of nowhere, he's just an asshole. He's especially an asshole to the oldest one, but pretty much he's an asshole to kind of all of them. And I think it's a harder transformation to take in, to believe. And especially because it's Ryan Reynolds, right? He's more the personality in the beginning. He's the early George, definitely, more than he is that latter George who's just insane and an asshole. So I think the transformation's a lot more believable in the original. But yeah, I think your assessment was pretty accurate. He's more interesting in the remake in the beginning, but definitely takes it in the original towards the end of the movie.
I don't know, because the original film has more runtime, as more or less uninteresting as George is, ultimately, especially early on. It's like, all right, he's a guy, and like he's ambiguously like he's got this ambiguous career. They get into a little bit where like he's supposed to be signing paychecks, and he's not. He's acting odd, and people are showing that he's odd. But like you mentioned, there's no real connection to the kids. You can tell that he's a stepdad. Like they bring that up. He's trying to make a connection, but it's not quite. It hasn't taken yet. As you mentioned, this is more of a pivotal moment here. This transition to a new home, a new life, and he's giving it his best as he knows. But like you don't know a lot about him early on, so wherever the movie takes you, it's like all right, he's getting angrier, or he looks sick now. All right, I get that. Reynolds, he has like a clear connection, especially with the youngest son. Like they like each other from what I can see, and he's giving it a really good effort to try to be like their new dad. And like, sure, there's a teenage kid that isn't fully on board yet, but to go from that jokey Ryan Reynolds that we all know and love to like this dude shirtless, he's like chopping wood in his kid's face, and I'm like, yo, this is kind of fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, he's making the kid hold the block of wood while he chops it. It's like, fucking really?
It's way too early on. And to be honest, the way the films show his relationship with the wife, it doesn't seem as actually connected with the wife in the remake that it does in the original. Like in the original, James Brolin's interactions that you see are mostly with her. So like the kids are more like window dressing, their background, and he's trying to connect there, but he clearly has chemistry and connection with Margot Kidder. So when he starts acting a little weird, I understand Margot giving him a little more leeway. Whereas in the remake, they're together, but it doesn't seem like there's a real reason why she would be okay with him like And she mentions in one of the scenes, like, is this discipline or is this torture? You know, like, I don't see why she would allow this guy to torture her kids.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, you want to go back a little bit, kind of what you said before. They had mentioned that he's the stepdad. I think, again, playing to the original strengths, they don't spell everything out for you right away. You don't learn that he's the stepdad right away. I didn't actually learn he was the stepdad until he's at the bar at the end of the movie with his coworker, and then I was like, oh my god, wow, I didn't realize they weren't his kids. In the remake, you know right away, like, hey, I'm his dad, here's a picture of dad, you're not my real dad. They really they force that down in your throat. So again, there's no mystery to the characters. Oh, this is his job, this is what he does, there's nothing to learn. But again, the original, they give you little bits here and there, then okay, so that's what's going on here. It again keeps you engaged, keeps you interested. So it's another strength of the original. And going to the relationships again, the amount of crazy, I suppose, that the remake George goes as opposed to the original, he definitely goes a lot more crazy, and he's a lot more, I guess, hostile towards the kids. And like you said, like, now she's really allowing him to do this. We didn't see her relationship with George to kind of let him be sort of abusive towards the kids, and it was she was just a little bit weaker. I don't know if we want to get into her characterization and how she was portrayed.
It's all tied in, and because it's weaker in the remake, it's fine to sort of like start lumping them together. But like, before we really dive into that, like you were saying about the subtle thing, there is a line in the original, like, where like you mentioned, it's more subtle, where like the stepdad line first comes in when he's like, I wish they would stop calling me like, I think it was like they were calling him George.
Oh, okay. Oh, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, but like it's like
it's very subtle.
Yeah, you could walk past that. It's like, okay, I guess he's like, this isn't their father, more or less. For instance, in the original, his career, I don't really know what he does. Like, he's supposed to sign these paychecks. But then in the remake, they do stuff where, like, his truck says Lutz Construction on it. You know, like, the remake really doesn't want you to be confused about anything going on. It wants you to know exactly what's happening. And I don't know, like, the original, George's desperation just makes more sense to me, you know? Both characters know in the original and the remake that, like, the house is probably, even being cheaper because it's haunted, is still out of their range. They're having money issues. But, like, just, I don't know, adding that extra character where, like, when George's coworker comes, you know, that builds out that character more, you know? And yeah, he punches the guy and he freaks out the guy at the wedding, but, like, he's still very much in the range of, like, all right, yeah, he's a little, like, on edge, but he's not, like, off base yet. Remake, he's nuts, dude. Yeah. And like, I think you were starting to talk about the wife in the remake. There's nothing there, man. Like, what's she doing?
I don't know. Just one more thing about George, I guess, in the original. Yeah, he does have these moments of, like, almost slips insanity. Like you said, he punched his coworker. He kind of loses it at the wedding, talking to the caterer. But, like, he comes back, right? He's like, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to me. He comes back. Ryan Reynolds, George, does not have any of those moments where he's like, man, I was kind of a dick. He's just like, I'm a dick all the time. This is my life now. I like how subtle it is, and it's not over the top, and then we're just gone in the original.
The scene that we're talking about with the babysitters, the motivation makes a little bit more sense in the original, where, all right, the kids are acting strange, they're doing, like, random stuff, and he's just basically saying, these kids need a little bit more discipline. He hasn't taken it to the extreme of, like, taking an axe to, like, a kid's, like, face for no reason. Like, here, hold this block of wood, which literally will stand on its own. I don't need you to hold it. It's just way, way over the top, and it doesn't feel right. I guess, we might as well talk about it because we're talking about how crazy it is. The dog scene. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Dude, unnecessary. Unnecessary. We got it. You're losing it. I keep focusing on it because it's so strange to me that they've included the scene of him basically making a kid hold wood while he chops at it. But then the next level where, like, the dog's barking. In the original film, the dog bark actually leads to you finding out more about
the house.
Yeah. It matters. In this scene, he just is so far, like, gone that he just kills a dog. And, like, we're just supposed to be an audience and accept that, oh, yeah, Ryan Reynolds, this guy who was, like, making all these quips and jokes earlier and having a good time, and it's too over the top, man. Like it goes beyond just like I'm kind of losing my sanity. I'm a little like the house is affecting me. It's like, oh, I'm a madman, and we haven't done enough background to make you think that this is actually out of character for him. Unfortunately, we don't know enough about Ryan Reynolds' character to say that was he always like this. You know?
Yeah.
Because he was able to keep it together and make some jokes doesn't mean he was sane.
It does happen earlier than you would expect in the movie, and I'm just going to add, not only does he kill the dog, he covers it up and lies about it, and never brings it up the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
So, that's not completely insanity there. That's some fucking, I thought this through shit. Like, I know what I'm doing here because I don't want to get caught for this horrific thing. And it's hard for, as an audience member, to be like, yeah, I'm still rooting for the guy that just hacked at the dog with the axe and lied about it to the kids. That's a bold move, Remake, and sorry, I can't be on your side if you're going to kill the dog with the axe. I'm sorry.
I think that you just nailed it right there where because we've gone so extreme so early with no real reasoning behind it, I'm checked out on that character. If she shot George at that moment, I wouldn't have cared.
No, not at all.
I'm like, yeah, this guy sucks. He's not a good guy. Fuck him. In the original, George hasn't gone so far that there's no redemption for him. It's like, all right, George. The hardest thing is, and it's definitely bad when he smacks Margot Kidder.
Yeah,
that's pretty bad. But also in the framework of like a movie from like 1974, it still kind of falls in that range, unfortunately, of like
acceptable at the time.
But
also when he does it, it was in the moment. He's like, shit, what did I do? I'm so sorry. I did not mean to do that. But even when Ryan Reynolds kills the dog, he's like, fuck, I'm gonna get caught. He's not even like showing that much remorse over what he did.
You're right. Like George in the original is reactionary.
Oh yeah.
Things are happening. Like he doesn't feel well. Yeah, he's always cold and he doesn't know what's happening to him. And he even I got one of the lines right here when he says, "I'm coming apart, a mother of God, I'm coming apart." Like George is like losing it, and it's a ramp, like it's a progression. You can see the arc. You need the arc. You can't just go like, "Hey kiddos," to like propping up a dog, because at that point you're just a madman, and it's hard to agree with you on anything. So like even at the end when the kid's like, "Why the hell are you bringing him along? Like, let's go," and he's right.
Yeah.
This dude tried to kill all of us. Why are you bringing him? And she's like, "Oh, it's we gotta get him away from the house." No, sorry, that relationship's over.
Yeah, he almost split that kid in two with an axe if she didn't come up with that shotgun. That kid would have been dead. So he had all the right to say, "No, fuck him. Leave him."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like early on they were trying to make it look like sort of like teenage angst, and I get that, but this was beyond the pale. And the idea that they're gonna recover this relationship is insane.
Yeah. I don't know how they're gonna do that.
Based on what we saw. Whereas in the original, all right, I get why George is still around. Like I get why he had a moment of I don't know, he had a moment of rage, but like it was nowhere near.
Yeah.
We saw like Ryan Reynolds trying to break through the door and chop at everybody and everything. It was so much more subtle and quote unquote acceptable that I understand why at the end the family's still together.
Yeah.
Even if Ryan Reynolds was being like completely influenced by the house, he's gone beyond the point where you could reasonably let him still be part of that family.
Just gonna say, the original George went back and saved the dog. Ryan Reynolds' George killed the dog. There you go.
And you know what? From an audience perspective, you can't say enough about that. Like, he stops in a moment where he should just leave.
Mm-hmm.
We're gone. You've escaped. Get out of there. And he said he stopped the car. He goes back. He gets his dog. And it almost cost him his life.
Yep.
But again, from a character building perspective, totally worth it because we still like the guy.
Yeah, and it was also sort of redeeming for him because up to that point he almost murdered his wife, right? But now he's like, is he really okay, or is he still kind of possessed by whatever made him go crazy? And then it's sort of like, oh, he's okay because you know what? He actually went back, saved the dog, so everything is going to be okay with this George. And you don't get a moment like that with the remake George. It's like he wakes up on the boat, just like, oh, there's the house. I guess we're not going back. Yeah. All right, are you still fucking crazy? I don't know, man.
Kind of going back to like tone and subtlety. Maybe it's implied. I'm kind of basing this off of the remake a little bit, he gets away from the house and he has this moment of, I got to go get my dog. Maybe that's part of it. It's not really spelled out that, like, because he has some distance from the house, that his sanity starts to come back. I mean, that's the way it works in the remake. I don't know if that's the way it works in the original.
Not
But
entirely sure because he was at that bar for a while, and
that's
I
true.
still feel like he was a little bit on edge. I don't feel
Yeah.
like he felt like, hey, I feel a lot better. It's not so cold here anymore. I feel like the house still had a hold on him. Like we said, the house had a range in that original film that went beyond just in that location. So I think it still had a grip on him at that point.
I think the house in the original, and it's something that actually makes the movie work a little bit. The house has sort of like a self-preservation aspect to it, a little bit of autonomy that like it picks its targets. You know, it's like these guys are clearly trying to like get rid of all the evil spirits, which is my power source. We didn't talk about it yet, but maybe we should talk about what's in the basement.
Okay.
It's like I do want to get to like the Margot Kidder
Hmm.
comparison, but like I don't know, we're here now, so we might as well talk about
Go for it.
the basement in the original film. All right, so let's go back to the bar. George in the original film, and I think it helps to introduce different characters. His co-business owner shows up, and the first time he tries to meet with George, his wife won't get out of the car because the house gives her the creeps. They meet again at the Witch's Brew.
Fitting name.
Yeah, I know, over the top.
A little
But,
on the nose, but whatever.
a little too much. But they meet at the Witch's Brew, and he's like, "Yo, George, you're acting weird. Like, what's going on?" George punches the guy out, but then they're like, apparently that's how people talked in the '70s. Like, "Oh, I guess we have-
like y'all longest yard, right? Hey, we fought. Now we could be friends.
exactly, just like Longest Yard. It's kind of cool that like his co-worker, as it were, and his wife, who's into the occult, she seemingly is like connected to spirits, decide to go back to the house. It moves the story along. First of all, she knows way too much about the house.
She definitely does.
That's okay. And then when she gets to the house, she knows way too much about the occult.
Yeah.
That's fine.
And then
But,
she
like,
has this weird spider sense. She's like, I need to go to the basement. It's like, do you? How do you know that?
well, because the basement's a portal to hell.
Damn.
The red room, like the room is red. Like there's this weird mirror effect, which charges to the time the film came out. Strange, but again, it gives you more backstory on the house. I'll take it.
Mhm.
A little ham-fisted the way we got there. The remake, at this point, does it matter that there's more occult happening? We already know what the current problem is, so it doesn't matter if there was more bad things that happened to the house. It was completely unnecessary.
Well, and it's not only a small little sort of room under the staircase. It's a huge jail or something that he's walking around. And can we just go into one little detail? Did you see Gollum in the remake? One of those prisoners was definitely Gollum.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. He looked exactly like Gollum, turning from Smeagol, like in that transition phase from Smeagol to Gollum. I think it was done on purpose because I was reading it on IMDb and there was a note about it in the trivia. I was like, why would they do that? It took me out of the movie. It's like, wait, where are the rings? What the fuck?
That's so funny. Again, even the way they do those two moments, where it's like, all right, these are like kind of extreme and potentially will take you out of the film. But in the original film, it ties back into, again, the mystery, whereas he looks like the previous homeowner, and the guy at the bar mentions that, and people mention that George looks like the son. It kind of makes you wonder if there's like some spiritual connection, if there's some sort of genealogy or time, some sort of like reason why he looks like the guy, why he's being affected by the house. The remake, a prison or a jail or whatever where they used to kill people. All right, that's interesting, I guess. But like again, we already have the occult before we got to this point. I don't know. Like the original film does a better job of handling that. We started talking about this because of the George character. It keeps me in a place where George still makes sense to me as a character, and I lose a little bit of that in the remake.
Yeah. It is completely unnecessary, and I did kind of zone out in the remake. And it's like, how does it even relate to the little Jody girl exactly? Because now there's another guy who's slashing throats here, and then there's blood everywhere. And is this supposed to be a moment where George is just completely snapped? I was sort of confused as to like what the point of him sort of seeing these visions underneath, since he's already been seeing visions. It's like
Right.
we need more visions to be seen, and it's like now that he's in this room, it's gonna make him snap more. It wasn't really clear what the motivation was in the remake to do that, because like you said, we've seen visions. We don't need more
Right.
visions.
Right. In the original film, that scene is an escalation. That's where things start to get kind of fleshed out, like ancient Indian burial grounds, which don't get me started on that in horror films. But all right, now we sort of get an idea of why the house is so evil. And as goofy as the guy's wife is, it's like randomly has a book with a picture of the house, and it's like, oh, the Ketchum murders and stuff like that. At least that's there. Maybe I missed something in the remake because I did zone out a couple times. The book that says like catch 'em, kill 'em, stuff like that. Like, was there a framework explaining that in the remake, or were you supposed to just kind of know that already?
I think you might have had to know it, because the way you see it in the remake is when Kathy's at the library, and then it's sort of just these random newspaper headlines that she's reading, but they don't really go into the amount of detail that the original does. I think you're just supposed to either already know it or hopefully connect the lines really quickly by yourself, if you can.
I don't know. I mean, we're talking about Kathy now. We should.
Sure, we'll go into Kathy. So we have Kathy in the original, portrayed by Margot Kidder, and we have Kathy in the remake, portrayed by Melissa George. Let's get into the comparison. Go for your Kathy. Which one's your Kathy?
I mean, my Kathy's Margot Kidder. One, just some of the stuff they do with her in terms of like when she's doing when she's got like the big 80s socks on and she's like doing like aerobics in the mirror with like her boobs out. Like, all right, that's cool.
I was like, Margot Kidder, I hardly knew you. Why didn't you do this in Superman?
I don't know, like Margot Kidder flesh out,
Yeah.
even early on in the film when they're going through the house and she wants to buy it. I get sort of why they want the house, like there's more background about what the appeal is. Melissa George is just, I don't know, she just feels like she's along for the ride. I don't know what she's there for other than to be like the mother of the kids.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, like we said, the original definitely benefits from the longer runtime. You get a lot more one-on-one time with Kathy in the original. I don't think you get any in the remake. She's definitely just a reactionary character in the remake. She's just like, oh, my kids, oh, my husband. It's like,
Yeah.
you never see her sort of dealing with it. And then in the original, you see Margot Kidder just like how what's happening to George is just affecting her. And I know I said there's too much of the priests in the original, but then that's sort of Margot Kidder. She gets a lot of screen time with that. She's trying to call the priests, and you get a lot more screen time with her. And you see how the house affects her too. She's also experiencing these weird phenomenon, but you don't really get that so much from the Kathy in the remake. It's all George's story, but it's more of George and Kathy's story in the original.
I think that that's a great point because as George is struggling and in the remake, again, we have a lot of open questions about what's happening to George. And to an extent, George is sort of incapacitated for a lot of this because he's so sick and he's so cold. He's always like putting firewood in the, the fireplace. But like Kathy is actively looking for solutions. You can see when her sister comes to town, she's like pleading with her to stay because she's clearly noticing something's wrong. She's reaching out to the priest and she begs the father, like, hey, we've got a problem. Like, I need to talk to you. And there's this background of being in the church. So, like, this is where the religion actually helps again. Where, like, she has this background of being religious, of seeking guidance from the church, seeking guidance from God, putting her crucifix in the house. Like, she just has more personality. She's got more character. Like you said, you see how this is affecting her because she's skeptical and confused as well. I don't know. The remake's just like the biggest action that we see from her is like when Ryan Reynolds has, I think it's the daughter, and she's like, give me my kid. And like, he just kind of throws a kid at her. Like, that's the biggest scene that I remember seeing from her other than
the roof scene. I think the roof scene with her daughter.
That's the roof scene. That's for sure. But like, she gets fake out killed a couple times.
Yeah, I hated that.
And there's not much there. I can't remember really a lot of her speaking lines or really what she did other than kind of freak out at different times in the movie.
Yeah, her character is not as drawn out in the remake, so you care less about her. You care less about her relationship to George because you don't really know, you don't get a lot of screen time with her. But I'm definitely more invested in her and her relationship to George in the original, just because we do get that personality, and I could see like, oh yeah, this is a person that I do care about, and I want good things to happen to her, not this just mom who's there to just kind of react to all this crap that's happening to her. You don't get any one-on-one time. I think that's definitely strength of the original, that you just get a lot more time with her.
And I think that there are moments that happen in the original that are, again, we talk about subtlety, but when George is talking about the house with her, and he sort of brings up some of the financials where he says that, oh, the boat fee went up wherever they were living before, and he was like, yeah, I didn't want to tell you, I didn't want to worry you about it, and he talks about the business a little bit more at length. Like Ryan Reynolds brings it up that, yeah, when the business is doing better, but there's no real clear indication that they're struggling as much as you see in the original, where it's clear that like George isn't signing checks are bouncing. You can kind of understand more why he feels stuck in the house. Part of that is through his conversations with Kathy as well, and like by adding some of those scenes, by having her react, it helps to flesh out both of their characters. You feel like both of them are your protagonists. Like you're giving yourself more people to care about. In the remake, making George so nuts, and then making Kathy not matter. Who are you rooting for?
Yeah,
is it the kids?
And I think another thing that the original is better is George and Kathy are more united. They're more together. They're in this thing together. In the remake, they separate. He moves into the basement. They're not even like a couple, like for like almost half the movie. They're just separate the whole time. So you're not rooting for them. But they don't do that in the original. They're always sleeping in the same bed, They're together. You feel like it's a struggle that they're trying to get through together. But like you said, it's who are you rooting for in the remake? Because Ryan Reynolds and Melissa George, they're not even together. So who am I rooting for? This is really confusing. Who is there a good guy? I wasn't really sure.
Yeah, like if you really go back and look at it, who's the good guy? Obviously, Ryan Reynolds is the star power here, but you've made him like Jack Nicholson from The Shining on like crack, and the female lead is almost non-existent, which is a shame. I think you get more screen time, more talking time from the babysitter.
Yeah.
If like the babysitter's a more compelling character.
A more fleshed out character, I think.
Absolutely. It's confusing. I don't know if there was like more there and they cut certain things. We always kind of talk about like studio notes and was there more to it that just wasn't working, I don't know. Some of the runtime in the original is unnecessary, but I think spending a little more time and attention with these characters mattered. I wish that there was kind of a scene that was equivalent of the wedding, although I don't think we need the full wedding scene in the original. I wish that there was a moment for Cassie to see more of his backslide, because I think that scene shows you in the original Kathy like eavesdropping in on him with notes that like he's starting to like become unhinged or like more testy.
Not only the babysitter that they kind of focus more on, it's the kids. They get a lot more to do than the mom too. And I think the original, they have Kathy kind of be sort of like our eyes, like, oh my god, what's happening to him? I don't know what to do, just want to help him. But I think in the remake they have more the kids being like the ones that are like suffering through George's transformation. And I don't know why they decided to do that. It really gives Kathy less to do in the remake,
because there's so much like not there for the remake Kathy. There's really not much to go on other than look, Margot Kidder did a great job. You can see her reacting, and you can see that she cares about her kids in a substantial way. I really don't have much on the Melissa George character, which is a shame. But when you're talking about the kids, because we might as well just move to that section of it, does it make sense to make the kid older in a remake? I don't think that it does. It seems to just be there to have like...
Just for that sexual tension between him and the babysitter?
Yeah, like it seemed like just to make the joke of like the hot babysitter coming through, which was also a very strange choice as well.
Yeah.
When you really like look at the film and what that brought to it.
Yeah, like we said, having her young made it more scary for her to be locked in this closet as opposed to a grown woman who could probably bust out of that weak ass door, you know?
Like I guess she's there for comedic relief. I think the remake tries to do comedy more. Career with Ryan Reynolds.
Holy shit, just on that note, there is Ryan Reynolds, when he's in his killing spree, at the end of the movie, he does pull out a one-liner. These kids are out of control. It's just like, it's like, are you really doing one-liners in this fucking crucial, intense moment? I was just like, oh my god, you took me out of the movie. Stop.
Yeah, that happens quite a bit. Like the babysitter is like smoking pot, and like I think I get where they're going with that. Tonally doesn't fit. The kid being older actually takes you out of it. I guess they're trying to make more of an emphasis on the children, but they don't have a lot of lines,
I think they definitely have more than the original kids. Cause like,
they do.
Especially the boys. I don't remember much about the boys except for their cheeks getting squeezed.
But I mean, like, I sort of think that actually plays to the advantage of the original, where the kids are part of it. Like it's messed up what's happening to the family, but because Margot Kidder is fleshed out, you get to see a mother sort of reacting to her family. Whereas, like in the remake, the kids have a little more agency, but like, are they bringing enough to the table? I think it actually works more to just have the kids be more background in the original with a lot of emphasis on the daughter. Because ultimately the story revolves around her because she's seeing the most out of everybody.
Yeah. Well, like
she knows what's going on.
Yeah, like I said before, like George is kind of distant. He's more distant in the original. Like as he's distant, we're also distant. We don't know as much as these kids, so George doesn't. So I think that does play to the strength of the original.
The oldest son, he's doing a decent job. I think the actor was Jesse James was his name, something like that.
I think so.
And yeah, you get the beat, kind of a funny beat with the sexual tension with the babysitter, and there's more character to him. But ultimately, he doesn't say a lot. He's mostly there just to be like tortured by Ryan Reynolds. So again, everything seems to float around George in the remake, and it actually isn't really the best look because there's got to be more to the story than just George being crazy.
Do you feel like he maybe should have done more because he was older? Like maybe he could have, I don't know, taken some action against George, like you mentioned, like when he was attacking the mom. Maybe he could have done something to sort of stand up. Maybe just having the kids be sort of young and defenseless, and the original just brings up the threat level of George as opposed to having like an older kid that might be able to fight back.
Yeah, I think you're right because like Margot Kidder is more helpless in the film, and like her unity with George is more important because of the age of the kids. Whereas like in this remake, like first of all, the kid's bringing up good points, and we already mentioned it, but like he's like, why are we bringing this guy with us? So like he's smart enough to know that. He does show some heroism when Ryan Reynolds is trying to break through the basement door, and he helps
hold
block
the door.
The door.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, that's why when there was that moment of like Ryan Reynolds sort of retaliating against Melissa George, I kind of thought that the kid was going to bring up the axe and hit him because, like, to me, like that fits the arc. That makes sense, It doesn't happen. It's just like, well, if you're going to make the kid older, like, put him to work,
Yeah, missed opportunity, I suppose.
What do you think about the little girl?
Little girl. So we have Amy in the original, portrayed by Natasha Ryan, and then we have Chelsea in the remake, portrayed by Chloe Grace Moretz.
In both films, I'll say that this is extremely important and strong character. I find, and obviously this is part of some of the differences that we talked about, I found that the original, the Amy character, I'm getting more of like the youthful, like naive performance from her because we don't know what's going on. She's just kind of telling you about her imaginary friend. Mm-hmm. And it works because there's, like we mentioned, there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of the unknown happening in the film. Chloe Grace Moretz, this is her first film, and she's had actually a very strong career since then. This was, I guess, was kind of like the world's intro to her. But I actually really do appreciate that character's arc and like, what she's going through, just because we clearly know that there's a ghost, and she does a great job of telling people what the ghost motivation is. But it just kind of falls back to one of those things of, I think ultimately I still prefer the subtlety of the unknown. I think it's a more jarring scene when the mom walks in and there's two rocking chairs going because it's alluding to what's happening. Whereas Chloe, she's doing a decent job, of course, but we already know what the problem is. So it doesn't give her as much ability to kind of make things scary or drive the action. Whereas that original Amy character is really one of the main parts of the story telling us what's going on.
I think I sort of go along the same lines. I think the mystery of the first film makes that Amy almost more threatening because she's so much more unknown because you don't see the ghost. You don't know if she is working with the ghosts or if she's even possessed by the ghost or if this is going to be like something we're going to have to deal with at the end of the movie. But then you have the Chelsea character in the remake and like you said, we see the ghosts and she doesn't come across to me as like possibly a threat or menacing, especially that roof scene where she's like, I'm gonna just join daddy, right? She seems more like a good girl that's just like sort of being misled by this ghost. And having the ghost there, we have a much more clear idea of like the ghost is the villain, right? The ghost is like, she wants me to be here with her forever and ever. So we know that the ghost is bad and not that Chelsea is bad. But in the original, we don't really see Jodie interacting, and we kind of hear like, oh, Jodie says this, but we're not sure if that's like an imaginary friend, if she's just making that up, or if she's actually being told that. And I think the mystery plays well into making the Amy in the original just like more threatening and having her be the unknown. So I liked her character more. I thought what she did was fine, like you said. I like her character more in the original, definitely.
I think that you locked in on another great point that it actually fits the George arc more in the original for him to kind of be, in a sense, thinking that perhaps this little girl is a source of the problem because, like, a lot of times when things are happening, he's seeing it from the perspective of this little girl who's, like, presumably acting out because they don't know that there's a ghost. Mm-hmm. In a dark way, like you could actually see him snapping and trying to like take out this like innocent child. Like you can see that arc and you can see it making sense to him from a character perspective. Whereas Ryan Reynolds, like you said, it's like this whole, oh, these kids are out of control. When clearly they're not. Yeah. Like I understand that maybe that was for a joke or to bring some levity to the film, but Ryan Reynolds, George is out of control. That's the problem. It's Ryan Reynolds and it's the ghost. In the original film, it's the house, it's the occult, it's the paranormal, it's the portal to hell. This little girl, is she part of it? Is she really the little girl, or is she has she been possessed by this house as well? You don't know. Mm-hmm. You really don't know. It's not spelled out, and it just gives that character just more influence in the film in terms of being able to drive mystery. Whereas in the remake, there's even the line where the little girl's like, oh, well, Jodie has said that George is bad and you're okay, mommy. Like, mm-hmm. All right, well, like now we know the ghost, according to the Chelsea character, we know the ghost isn't really after the mom, they're only after George. Mm-hmm. And George killed a dog, so I don't care if the ghost is after you. There's problems that are presented with how the film is shot and presented to us as an audience.
And I think just kind of adding to that, having Amy in the original, you don't know if she's working with the ghost exactly. Like, that could almost justify why George would want to kill his family. She's not really working with the ghost so much in the remake as being tricked by the ghost and everything. So you could understand, I guess, George's motives more in the original because he doesn't understand everything. We don't understand everything. But in the remake, right. We understand, oh, it's a ghost. So don't kill your family because it's a ghost.
It just seems to be less of a psychological breakdown in the remake. He's either possessed or this is kind of more of a conscious choice. Like, he does seem to be a bit like, well, obviously he's possessed because the resolution at the end where he gets farther away from the house and it seems to loosen its grip. But I don't know, there's just more ambiguity to it in the original, and it serves the movie well where, you know, is he possessed? Is he just, you know, reacting to this? I don't know. Once again, the mystery has allowed the film to make choices where I get why George would try to kill the kid in the original in a way that logically makes sense. Whereas in the remake, he's just crazy,
Yeah.
and it's not good enough,
Yeah.
personally.
Definitely. The mystery definitely helps serves the story better. Where should we go from here?
We got into the mystery of things and a little bit of the runtime. I think the original could have done well to be a little bit shorter. I think the remake could have been a little bit longer if you flesh out characters versus just trying to like jump scare us. I mean, in both situations, I think the endings for both films feel flat to me. I don't know how you feel about it, but they both just felt a little weak, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're definitely both weak because ultimately the family completely gets away and the house is still there. And then you get this text in both movies how like and then they just moved out and left all their stuff there. Pretty much the end. And it's not a very satisfying resolution because of like everything you've sort of gone through the whole time. You expect like something to happen, like either he does go through with the murders or maybe something happens to the house, but none of that happens, and it's like it's almost anticlimactic in a way because it's like and then they moved away after 28 days. It's all and then you're thinking like well maybe they should have just moved away earlier and then we
Yeah.
wouldn't have to have gone through all this nonsense. Nobody dies. Everybody's pretty much okay psychologically, as far as I can tell. Like nobody was like scarred for life from what they show, and yeah, it just does definitely feel sort of anticlimactic at the very end. But then the remake does show you just a little extra more, with our ghost Jody just kind of screaming there in the middle of the house, and we see these quick cuts, and then she gets dragged through the floor. And I don't know why they showed me that. And I wrote in my notes, what was the point of that? Why did they do that? Why?
I just think that jump scare trend in films around that time did that, where like I think they tried to make you feel a certain way about the evil character. Like The Ring clearly did a great job, as you mentioned, of creating a horror around this particular character. From like a marketing perspective, you saw a lot of times where they would focus on the particular evil and would say, "Oh, like what's the secret or what's the deal with this character?" I'm sure there was something in some sort of advertisement that was like, "There's something strange about Jody." You know what I mean? Like it just felt like we're gonna franchise this, and this is gonna be what we work around. Like other than that, there was no storytelling reason for that to happen.
Yeah, I guess if they're setting up for a sequel, it kind of makes sense. Like she's gonna be here forever, so the next family that moves in is gonna be haunted. But we already know this is based on a true story, and nothing has happened since pretty much the initial murders. Because
Right.
there's even question as to like, well, did this really happen with the Lutz? Is this just a hoax too?
That's a good point. That there's controversy about how true a true
Yeah.
story this is.
Yeah.
In the original, because more or less we've been a little bit more sympathetic of the original, but there's some issues. It's like how much more broke is he going to be? If like he already can't pay his bills, and the IRS is already falling, who cares if like this house goes? Like maybe he's looking at the house as like this is the one thing that I can hold on to. This makes me feel like I'm successful to an extent, but like there's just so many moments to just say I'm leaving.
Yeah.
Like I like have notes here. It was like, couldn't she stay with the sister? Couldn't stay at the church? Like, if there's this much problems with this house, maybe reevaluate. Take some time back. Like, you can stay somewhere else while you try to figure that out. And like for the end to just be like, yeah, and they left. And it was like, well, yeah, they should have left. It makes it feel like what was the point of you watching any of it in the first place?
Yeah.
All right, after like a week of all these like, oh shit, this is bad moments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe a rational human being would have done something different. The remake adds, I guess, that extra element of like the range of the house, and like if we can get Ryan Reynolds away from the house, he'll be normal again. I still argue what's the point because of what he's done in that house, whether or not it was the house controlling him or not. These things happen, and there's no way to reset that. So
Yeah.
then just have this idea of like, and then they left. Like that feels even weaker than the original, because at least in the original, like I understand that they would still like George. They would still want to be around him to an extent. I don't know why the hell they would be hanging out with George in the remake.
The thing, come back to the dog. Is he gonna tell them about the dog ever, or is he just gonna take that to the grave? It's like, They really shouldn't have killed that dog because it just left me
Yeah.
with more questions, and it's like I can't see him being redeemed after that action. Like you
Right.
said, it's like we don't want him anymore. Get rid of him.
It's one of those things where if some of the early tension is the kids, especially the older one, doesn't like him and like they care about their dad. That's a note that we didn't really get into, so we can talk about it here. But like in the remake, they really care about the dad,
Yeah.
the original dad, not Ryan Reynolds, of course. And they bring him up constantly. Melissa George is trying to tell the kids to give Ryan Reynolds a chance. Why would they ever? You're never going to repair that relationship. That relationship
No.
is effectively done. There's nothing there anymore. I don't know. Like they didn't give me enough as an audience member to make me understand why she put that gentleman on her boat.
No. And it's like I said, the original, Elise George kind of has a redeeming moment where he goes back to save the dog. Ryan Reynolds George doesn't save them from anything. If anything, he's the threat. He's the threat the whole time. He does nothing to redeem himself in those children's eyes. So yeah, why would they ever trust being with him ever the rest of their life? They're gonna have like sleep with one eye open forever. He has done nothing to show that he will not hurt them.
And I think that kid being a little bit older is going to make that point. You know, like that's not in the movie, but you got to imagine he's going to make that point for like the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm.
This guy like threatened me with an axe. He threatened you with an axe. You almost shot him. Like we almost died. Like I don't like this guy. There would never be a moment where he's able to recover that. To have the same screen scrawl that just says, "Yeah, the lunch is left," and they left the stuff. It's like, well, as disappointing as it is in the original, it fits a little bit more where it's like, all right, there's this mystery. We don't really know what was going on. We assume it was like the satanic, the occult, but like the family left and they just never looked back. Okay, that still makes sense in the original. I think it's a bit of a cop-out. It's a little boring, but in the remake, it's like you can't just take everything that I saw, killing the dog, trying to kill the kid, all this crazy torture stuff, and then just be like, and then they left. It's like, not only do I not accept it as an ending, I find it hard to believe that is the end of the story. It's just like, and then they left, and then in my mind, I'm like, and George got a restraining order, and everyone else moved to Connecticut. Like, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, they definitely did sort of almost force like a, and then they were happily ever after in the remake, and you're like, no, they're not.
No,
There's no way.
It's an impossibility that resolved well.
Yeah, they definitely dropped the ball there with the remake. That was one of the places I would hoped that they improved upon the original, but I don't think they did at all. And like you said, it's worse.
I think they're even better off not putting that text at the bottom. You know, like for him to have that moment like, Kathy, don't look at it, don't look back, it's over. Like that by itself would have been better than that line with the "we left all our stuff." No, we saw that, we get that. The original, like you said, the remake, like you said, it goes back and it looks at I don't know, the little girls in the room again. Then they showed 3:15 a.m., which I guess is when that family was shot. Like I'm assuming, I don't think it was really brought up. You know, it just fell flat.
He needed a redeeming moment in order for them to accept him back, and he didn't have one, so there was no reason that they should have accepted him.
I think so. Even if there was like a moment of clarity where like on the way out, like if we know it doesn't happen, but like if he like torched the house maybe,
or like maybe like a piece of like the house like falls and like he maybe saves one of the kids or something, you know, something to show that like, yeah, I'm a good guy deep down under, you know. It was the house, I know it was like a little fucked up, but you know, when it's me, I will save you. But we don't get any moment like that.
Yeah, or even no, because even that moment doesn't work. I was gonna say even if they like moved around when like Kathy gets her hair stuck in like the engine of the boat. Like,
I forgot about that scene. Yeah, he can't even redeem himself from that. Oh my god.
I mean, like like she literally was like, "You just tried to kill me."
Yeah.
Like yeah, he did. He just tried to kill me. He was contemplating letting you drown. It's like if you move that a little bit, like it's scarier and more like jarring if the little girl got stuck in the rotor and then he like snapped to and saved her and there wasn't that like back and forth like you saw with his wife. Maybe that's the moment that redeems him. Again, getting in the cheesy like Hollywood types imagery, if he's like pulling her out of the boat thing or out of the water and like the ghost hand is pulling kid.
Hmm.
Like stuff like that could actually give you something to rally behind.
Right.
That's just not there.
Wow, I forgot about the boat scene. Yeah, that was really fucked up.
Yeah, absolutely crazy, dude. Like her hair gets stuck in the rotor,
And
and
then
you're just sitting there like,
yeah, she could see him not doing
thought he was
anything.
gonna
It's
kill
fucked
her.
up.
It was like it was better off if he did.
Yeah, that's two times where the movie kind of copped out that he was gonna kill her, and it's like, "Arr."
You're actually better off like killing that character off and having the son, I don't know, like running, but then like he gets his hands on the shotgun and like I don't know, like there's just so many other things you could do than what actually happened.
Oh, by the way, where did the shotgun come from in the remake?
I don't know. She grabbed it at some point, but I'm not sure where it
No,
was.
where did he get it from? Ryan, George. He just comes out of the basement with a shotgun all of a sudden, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't remember seeing a gun any other shots. Usually, the way movies work is they show you something in the beginning and they bring it back in the end. We saw the
That's
axe
true.
a lot. We saw him drag that axe a lot. They did that
Yeah, the
glamorized shot a lot in the remake, but we never saw the shotgun as far as I remember.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing the shotgun. I guess it's sort of a callback to the actual murders in like the original film because the shotgun is used, almost an identical looking shotgun is used in the original murder before the Lutzes move in.
I get that. I remember that, but it's like, where did it
But
come
yeah,
from?
you're right. Like, does he have a shotgun like that? Like, like you said, where did that come from? Is it a callback to that? Is it his own shotgun? Like, what's happening?
They didn't explain it at all.
Man, I think we're starting to get to that point. Like,
Yep, I think we are.
Amityville Horror and the Amityville Horror 2005 remake. Dan, I think you know how to ask the question.
All right, it's judgment time, Reggie. Should this remake exist?
I personally don't think that it should exist because it's sort of like last time we were talking about like 101 Dalmatians. It's like, actually, no, I got an even better one.
Okay.
It actually reminds me of that episode we did with the Italian Job, where, all right, you've got kind of like the bones of this franchise, but to me, it feels like you're just doing other movies that were popular at that time with the caveat that it's tied to the Amityville Horror. Like, it's a jump scare mess. The jump scares don't really work. They're not actually very scary or interesting at all. Maybe it was better in theaters, but I don't know. I can't see it being much better. It just didn't feel right. Shortening the runtime you would think would have made it better, but it actually made it worse. Ryan Reynolds is too much of a nice guy to be your character, and by then he's just too cartoonishly bad. It's not a great film by any stretch of the imagination. Some of the characters actually have less to do in the remake, especially from the female character's perspective. I don't think they should have made the movie at all. It just doesn't add anything, and it's not very interesting.
Yeah, like I always say, every time I watch the original, I always try to think, what can the remake do to sort of justify that they made a remake? So I guess this one was a little tough for me. I think one of the things I sort of mentioned before was maybe cut back a little bit on the religious aspect of it. The original, while I liked some of those scenes with the flies, I did feel too much like The Exorcist, and I was hoping that maybe the remake could just make it more about the house and less religious, almost like The Shining or something like that. And they almost did that, but then they did bring that priest back in a little after the halfway point. And then the other thing that I was hoping that the remake would improve on was that ending, because like you said, it left both of us pretty flat. And it didn't, and it was actually made worse just because of what they did with the George character. And then the things that they added, such as the ghosts and the jump scares, didn't work for me either. So at the end of the day, I'm just going to have to say, no, they shouldn't have made this remake. And just touching on what you said, like Ryan Reynolds and Melissa George, not the strongest characters. I definitely like the way they were portrayed in the original. I had problems with the original, especially that ending. I wish there was something that the movie could have done better instead of, and then they went home. It's tough though, because I guess what are you supposed to do? Because like nobody dies and then nothing happens to the house. So I don't know how you end it, but I just feel like they could have done something in the remake. I mean, it was like 26 years later. They could have come up with something, and what they came up with was just, like you said, just like flavors of the time. They just copied off The Ring into jump scares. So, no, they didn't need to remake this movie. Not the way they did.
Yeah, I actually like that point that you made there, where like at this point there were people that were involved or something like that. You could have done a thing that like a lot of movies do now, where you do like interviews with real people from the area, that like talk about the house and stuff like that, show pictures of like what the people that were involved actually looked like. Those are things that I think you can do in a remake towards the end to make it feel bigger. Now there is controversy about how true either film is when it comes to the true story. But
Well, the remake is even less true because George Lutz actually sued somebody, either the studio or something, just because I think the dog killing scene was just like, defamation of character or something. So for him, at least, he was like, well, this remake is nowhere near what the story I wrote in my book, or I told.
I don't know how available he was, but there was an opportunity there to bring like a George Lutz on and to have like this is the guy, this fictional sort of account. Actually, there's more to it than that. You would have hoped that that was there. Like you mentioned, there's issues with the original. Let's be honest about that. But I think overall, the overall package that you get is just such a better product than the remake that it's just unfortunate that we even had to sit through that remake because it wasn't worth the time, in my opinion.
Yeah, the original does do, like we said, it reveals a little bit of the mystery a little bit at a time to keep you engaged. So it does that very well, and you don't get any of that in the remake, which was probably the highlight of the original, that it was able to like keep you like wanting to know what was going to happen more.
Weirdly, it was something that as I was watching it, I actually thought that in the original that George was a bit weaker, in my opinion. Like I didn't really get a lot of personality from him, especially early on. Actually, that blank slate works towards the end of the film in a way where fleshing out the character early weakens the story later because
weakens the transformation. At least it's more less believable if he's this nice, gets along great with the kids, kind of a Ryan Reynolds-y character as we saw in the remake.
I think you could still do that if you had an actual arc. Like it just nice guy, bad guy. Like there was nothing really to me that felt like we ramped into him getting worse. Like he just kind of went from being a decent dude to like a terrible dude, and there wasn't enough sort of in between those moments. And I know we'll see this very often. It's just another Hollywood reskin, It just okay. The characters have the same names and the settings are the same, but they're not even tonally remotely the same film, and it wasn't worth it.
Just going back to something you mentioned, you said we learned more information since the original movie was made, which was sort of one of the motivating factors for making the remake. They said that they had learned more information about the incident since then, but I didn't really see it. I mean, did you see anything new?
No, I mean, I'm sure that was used for like marketing, but I didn't see anything in there that made me feel different about the story. Wasn't anything particularly different or compelling that was like, oh, I'm glad that we brought this back because I didn't know that happened. That just never happens in the film.
Yeah. We gotta stop watching these horror remakes where they cast these funny guys in the lead, Reggie.
Yeah. Wow, you're right. That's
Psycho in this one.
As much as a miscast as Vince Vaughn was this time around, like it's the wrong tone for Psycho. It doesn't really fit, but maybe because Psycho was a shot for shot, more of it was connected to the original. This remake, I don't know, man. It just didn't feel like the same film. Trying to create that big scare Hollywood character, just too early of a reveal. And I think that the remake didn't understand how important not knowing what was going on actually was.
Yeah. How enticing that mystery and slowly revealing it could be. So if you're going to watch a version of Amityville Horror, definitely stick with the original. All right, so what do you want to do next?
Let's see. So we're coming off a sci-fi, we're coming off a horror film, and we're coming off a kids cartoon. I think just to cleanse the palate, we should do something a little more action-oriented. I think you mentioned before about doing a Western. You got any ideas for that?
So a few Westerns that have been remade. We got 3:10 to Yuma, Magnificent Seven, and True Grit. So I think any one of those could be pretty good.
You know what? True Grit. I think that'd be a good one. I haven't.
Yeah, let's go check that out. I've seen all 3 of the remakes. I haven't actually seen any of the originals of the movies I just said. So, yeah, we'll start with True Grit.
Yeah, I think the only remake that I've seen, at was 310 to Yuma. I actually didn't catch Magnificent Seven yet, but I think True Grit is a nice place to start. And I won't tell you my experience with either film yet. We'll save that for the podcast.
All right. True Grit it is. Thanks for listening to another episode. If there's anything we missed or any differing opinions you guys have, definitely let us know. I'm Dan Bulick, and you can find me at Console Wars Guys on Twitter or youtube.com/Console Wars.
I'm Reggie Parker. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at RP Comedy. Check out my website, rpcomedy.com.
Thanks for listening to Retro vs. Remake.